A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross is a YA-ish fantasy novel set on a Scottish-inspired island called Cadence. It follows Jack Tamerlane, a young man ostracised by the island for being a, well, bastard child without a father, and is eventually sent away to the mainland to study music. However, years later he is summoned back to Cadence by his laird, and upon his return he discovers the island is in the throes of tragedy, as young girls are being mysteriously snatched from their families, disappearing without a trace. Is this the work of their enemies, the Brecon clan, or are there sinister spirits at play? Firstly, this book contains the most beautiful description. The landscape, the characters, the smells, the food, the flowers, just everything is so richly described. It was lovely to read. Secondly, the setting. It's very clearly Scottish inspired, with lairds and dirks and plaids. I love Scotland, so I was happy. But I really enjoyed how despite it being clearly inspired by Scotland, it didn't just feel like Scotland. It had its own identity. It was its own place, which is exactly what you want in these sort of books. Thirdly, the magic system. It's very soft and never fully explained, but I loved it and I thought it really suited the strange and wild landscape. Magic is soaked into every element of Cadence, from the spirits carrying messages on the wind to the ever-changing landscape. There are weeds that burn whoever tried to pick them, thistles that give you nightmares, enchanted blades, ghosts, and I loved all of it. Fourthly, continuing on from the magic system, I loved the spirits or the folk, which, judging by their interaction with people, are essentially fairies. They're connected with the four classical elements, which I enjoyed, and are at the heart of a lot of the island's folklore. I also appreciated the use of fairy tale in places. Anyone who knows me knows that I love fairy tales, so to see them incorporated into the novel was really lovely to see, along with all the various tropes of fairy lore that you get in places like Scotland and Ireland, such as the second sight to see into the fairy realm, and the way that time is affected by fairies. That was all lovely. Fifthly, I appreciated that despite being a fantasy, the plot and issues are very real. The history between the two clans, the Tamerlanes and the Brecons, while soaked in magic, is very human. And though it at first seems clean-cut, the Brecons are the evil, plundering ones, whilst the Tamerlanes are the poor victims. As the story continues, we begin to realise that this isn't that simple. The Brecons do not kill, and they have no choice but to plunder, as they do not have the capacity to grow enough food to last them through their bitter winters. The Tamerlanes, meanwhile, will kill any Brecon that crosses the border without mercy. So the relationship between these two clans is much more complicated than it first appears, and that is a very important thread of the plot, and it was very interesting. I really enjoyed that. And finally, I love the romance between two of the side characters, Torrin and Sidra. Torrin is the captain of the guard and the laird's brother, whilst Sidra is a humble healer. And it is only the secondary romance. I'll talk more about the primary one later on. But it is very beautifully done and it feels very genuine. They are already married at the beginning as a sort of marriage of convenience, but as you can expect, they do slowly fall in love with each other. The romance, therefore, is not some dramatic tale, but instead a much smaller story. The focus isn't on manufactured drama, but on them tackling very real issues. Most markedly, the possibility of being incompatible, which is something that a lot of people in the real world struggle with. They also have to face issues within themselves, which I'll not go into the specifics, but the important thing is they have to work on themselves, by themselves, instead of relying on the other person to do it for them. And it's only when they have worked on themselves are they truly able to love another person. I also appreciated that whilst, yes, there were sexy scenes, they were very tasteful and not at all graphic, focusing instead on the emotions before fading to black. So that was kind, thank you. Thank you, author. There were a couple of writing issues. Obviously the description is where Ross really excels, and so with some of the less descriptive sections I found it a little bit telling over showing at times, but that's not really a huge deal. Just a little thing. However, I did take issue with the way Jack's maltreatment was handled. As I mentioned earlier, he is ostracised by the rest of the island as a child, to the point where he gladly accepts the laird's offer to go study somewhere else and fully intends to make a life for himself away from the island instead of returning. So when he is summoned back, well, everyone just seems to have forgotten what he went through at their hands. So when they said things like, oh, we were expecting you to return to us, but you didn't, and oh, the island needed you, I got very frustrated. But no, you were cruel to him. You don't now get to guilt trip him for sodding off and staying away. But Jack, for some reason, lets go a lot of that bitterness without cause. There's only one apology, which I'll talk about later, and nothing else. No shows of remorse or guilt or embarrassment. It never felt resolved, which was annoying, as there was a lot of focus on the fact that he wasn't treated well, and then it just seemed to be forgotten about. The other issue is with the primary romance between Jack and Adara. Now this romance is by no means bad. In fact, compared to most, it's actually rather good. But when you have it side by side with the beauty of Torrid and Sidra's relationship, it was lacking rather in emotion. So Adara is the laird's daughter and Jack's childhood nemesis. It's meant to be a sort of enemies to lovers ordeal, which is fine. I enjoy the trope well enough, and mixed in with another trope I enjoy of the haughty royal is taken down a peg or two and falls in love in the process. I thought this would be excellent, but it wasn't. Firstly, despite them saying how much they supposedly hated each other as kids, it didn't feel that way, like they were telling us one thing and then showing us another. But okay, they hated each other, we'll go with that. Then Jack shoves off, comes back, and they're both more or less over it. Jack gripes a little, and Adara apologises for one specific thing, kind of. But other than that, there's nothing. And you could argue that they're just both matured and have grown past it, but it obviously still affects Jack, and Adara should have been mature enough to apologise first. She doesn't. So I would have expected Jack to hold more of a grudge and Adara to have to work harder to gain his trust. I wanted more friction as they navigate into a friendship and eventually a romance, but instead they're just fine with all that and go straight into this close friendship. And then after that, despite all of the structure being in place, lots of scenes together, conversations about their emotions and their hopes and dreams, it was missing the butterflies. It just didn't feel romantic, which is a shame because the author had done it so well with the other romantic plotline. But this is only part 1 of a duology, and I'm holding out hope that part 2 will show us a better and stronger romance for these two characters. All in all, this is a well put together fantasy, which I would definitely recommend. I didn't actually realise this was part 1 of 2, and even when I finished it, I just thought it was a very open ending, and I would have accepted it as being just an open ending, if a little heartbreaking and very brave. But there is a part 2, which I will read as soon as I get my hands on a copy. I'm especially excited, as one gripe I had with this, which I didn't mention, was that the element of fire got rather shafted compared to the other 3. But it looks like that'll be rectified in book 2, named A Fire Endless. So, can't wait for that. So yeah, let me know what you thought in the comments. Have you read this book? If so, what did you think? If not, do you think you'll go and check it out? And as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Ciao.